Texas is handing out free land, actual residential plots with $0 signs attached. And in some counties, the better deal isn't the free land at all. It's the places where nobody asks permission, where building codes don't exist, where you can drop a shipping container on 20 acres and the county collectively shrugs. We're talking about a 2-track system. Track 1, municipalities so desperate for taxpayers, they'll give you the dirt if you promise to build. Track 2, towns and counties so remote they've given up enforcing anything, which means total structural freedom. Both models are driven by the same reality. Rural Texas is emptying out, poverty rates are pushing 30% in some regions, and local governments have decided the best way forward is to incentivize people who can handle their own infrastructure. We're going to walk through 7 specific opportunities: towns giving away plots, places where building permits don't exist, state programs cutting checks for $80,000, and tax exemptions that make solar installations effectively free. Each one comes with trade-offs, and we're going to be honest about what those are. Here are 7 dirt-cheap Texas places offering free land or cash for off-grid living. La Villa. Let's start with the headline grabber. La Villa, a small town about 80 miles inland from the Gulf of Mexico in Hidalgo County, runs the most straightforward land giveaway program in Texas. They identified 91 residential plots and decided to distribute them for free. No lottery, no first come scramble. You apply, prove you can build, and they hand you the deed. Well, sort of. The deed comes with a 5-year leash. The town transfers ownership through a restricted title or a lease-to-own agreement. You get immediate possession, but if you sell or move out before 5 years, you owe the town either the current market value of the land or a predetermined penalty. This isn't charity, it's a calculated investment in future tax revenue. The town is betting that by eliminating the upfront land cost, about $3,000 per lot in raw value, they can attract people who will redirect that capital into building a home and contributing to the local property tax base. The qualification process is strict. You need to demonstrate financial readiness to build through either a pre-approved construction loan or a verified budget. The town mandates a minimum home size of 900 square feet, and you will pay taxes immediately. The combined property tax rate in Hidalgo County hovers around 2.3% of assessed value. New residents can apply for homestead exemptions that lower this liability over time, but the obligation starts the moment you take possession. So why is La Villa doing this? The poverty rate in Hidalgo County was reported near 29% in 2023. The town views these land programs as essential for creating a stable population of working people who can afford housing but are priced out of traditional markets. The trade is clear. You get free land and proximity to McAllen, which has a level 1 trauma center about 20 to 30 miles away. In exchange, you commit to 5 years, build to code, and become part of the local tax infrastructure. Alpine and Terlingua. Now let's flip to the opposite model. The towns of Alpine and Terlingua in Brewster County don't give you free land. Instead, they give you something potentially more valuable: the complete absence of building permits, impact fees, and code inspections in unincorporated areas surrounding these towns. The county doesn't have an active building code office for residential structures. The structural integrity of your home is not regulated. You can build with adobe, rammed earth, stone, mud, materials that are explicitly prohibited in most jurisdictions. The regulatory tax, permit fees, inspection costs, impact fees disappears entirely. In a typical suburban build, those costs can run $3,000 to $15,000. Here they're zero. The land itself is stunningly cheap. In the Terlingua Ranch area, 5 to 20 acre parcels sell for $450 to $1,200 per acre. Total purchase prices range from $9,000 to $25,000, but you're inheriting every responsibility. Water is the first problem. The Terlingua area averages 11 to 13 inches of annual rainfall. Most residents rely on rooftop rainwater harvesting or hauling water from community wells. Sewage is the second problem. The state of Texas still requires proper disposal of wastewater through a permitted septic system or state-approved composting toilet. The third problem is distance. Big Bend Regional Medical Center in Alpine is a level 4 trauma center. If you're having a heart attack or a stroke, you're getting airlifted to El Paso or Odessa, both over 200 miles away. This is the trade. Land costs almost nothing, codes don't exist, and you can build whatever you're capable of engineering. In exchange, you're responsible for water, sewage, structural safety, and accepting that specialized medical care is hours away by helicopter. Presidio Presidio sits just west of Alpine and operates under a similar regulatory philosophy. The median cost per acre for small rural tracts near this border town is $999. The median listing price for parcels is $24,500. The county does not actively enforce residential building codes in unincorporated areas around Presidio, which means the same structural freedom applies here. You can build alternative structures, you can use non-standard materials. Nobody is going to show up with a clipboard. The difference between Presidio and the Alpine Terlingua area is subtle but meaningful. Presidio has slightly better access to water resources in certain areas, though better is relative when you're still in the Chihuahuan desert. The solar potential is identical, clear skies dominate, and photovoltaic efficiency is among the highest in the continental United States. The town itself has a stronger border town identity, which affects everything from local politics to available services. You're closer to crossing into Mexico for certain supplies or medical care, which some residents utilize as part of their resource strategy. But the sewage rule still applies. The state requires proper disposal systems regardless of building code enforcement, and the distance to level 1 trauma care is still measured in hours, not minutes. The nearest major hospital is in El Paso, roughly the same distance as from Alpine. Presidio is for people who understand that regulatory freedom is not the same thing as infrastructure support. The town and county can't afford to enforce codes, which benefits you, but that same budget constraint means they also can't afford to maintain roads extensively, provide emergency services beyond basic sheriff patrols, or guarantee cell coverage in outlying areas. One additional consideration, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality monitors groundwater contamination in these desert regions. If your DIY septic system is leaching into an aquifer, they will find out eventually, and the penalties are severe. The freedom to build does not extend to the freedom to pollute. That distinction matters because it shapes how you design your waste systems from day one. The town of Presidio itself is small, with limited commercial infrastructure. You're driving to larger towns for most supplies, which means planning shopping trips in bulk. But for people who want cheap land, structural freedom, and proximity to an international border, this area offers a unique combination of factors. The cultural context is different from other parts of Texas, heavily Hispanic, bilingual, with economic and social ties across the Rio Grande. That changes the character of daily life in ways that matter if you're planning to integrate into a community rather than isolate on your property. Fort Hancock and Sierra Blanca. Fort Hancock and Sierra Blanca, two small towns in Hudspeth County located just east of El Paso, have become magnets for the off-grid community because of one specific characteristic: total absence of zoning and building restrictions in unincorporated areas around these towns. The exception is the small town of Del City, which has its own rules. But outside that municipality, the county has effectively declined to regulate land use. This creates a legal environment where you can camp on your own land indefinitely, park an RV and live in it full time, or build alternative structures like shipping container homes, tiny houses, or even converted sheds without seeking any kind of permit. This level of freedom is almost unique in the United States. Most states have some baseline requirement: minimum square footage, foundation standards, utility connections. Hudspeth County has decided it's not their job to enforce those requirements. The result is a landscape dotted with solar arrays, water tanks, RVs, and improvised structures that would be illegal almost anywhere else. The typical parcel size in the developments marketed to off-grid buyers runs from 20 to 53 acres. The land is cheap, usually priced at a few $100s per acre for raw desert. The solar potential is exceptional, over 300 sunny days per year, which makes battery-based power systems highly reliable. Fort Hancock sits along Interstate 10, which provides easier access to El Paso compared to the more remote sections of the county. Sierra Blanca is further east, more isolated, but still connected by major highway infrastructure. But the logistics are demanding. Many of these properties are located behind dirt or gravel roads that require a four-wheel drive vehicle, especially during monsoon season when flash flooding can wash out access routes. The county's road naming standards reflect this decentralization. Private roads serving multiple family structures must be named for emergency response purposes, but the infrastructure remains essentially private and unmaintained by the county. If the road washes out, you're responsible for fixing it. If your neighbor's culvert collapses, That's a negotiation between property owners, not a county services issue. The distance to services is more manageable than in Brewster County. El Paso is 45 to 90 miles away, depending on which part of the county you're in. That's a level 1 trauma center within reasonable reach, which makes a significant difference for retirees or families with medical considerations. You're still isolated, but you're not 200 miles from an ICU. The towns themselves, Fort Hancock and Sierra Blanca, are tiny with minimal commercial infrastructure. You're not moving here for the local restaurant scene, but the proximity to El Paso means you can make supply runs, access specialized medical care, and maintain connections to urban amenities without living in an urban environment. The sewage rule applies here too. Even with 0 building codes and 0 zoning, the state of Texas requires proper waste disposal. That means a septic tank, an approved composting system, or another method that meets Texas Commission on Environmental Quality Standards. The freedom to live in an RV or a shipping container does not include the freedom to create a public health hazard. This is one of the few non-negotiable requirements that applies across all of rural Texas, regardless of how permissive the local jurisdiction is about building codes. One final consideration: Hudspeth County's regulatory vacuum is a function of its budget and population, not a deliberate policy choice to encourage off-grid living. The county simply lacks the resources to enforce codes. That could change if the population increases significantly or if state-level mandates force compliance. For now, it's a freedom zone, but that status is contingent, not guaranteed. If you're betting your long-term housing strategy on the county maintaining its current hands-off approach, understand that you're making a calculated risk based on the county's current financial limitations. The character of these towns also matters. Fort Hancock and Sierra Blanca are border communities with small, largely Hispanic populations. The economic base is minimal: agriculture, ranching, some border-related services. These are not places with thriving downtowns or diverse employment opportunities. You're moving here specifically for the land and the freedom, not for the community amenities. That said, the people who do live in these areas tend to be self-reliant and accustomed to making do with limited resources. If you're the kind of person who thrives in that environment, you'll find like-minded neighbors. If you need social infrastructure and regular community events, you're going to feel isolated. Waxahachie. Waxahachie, the county seat of Ellis County located south of Dallas, represents a different approach to off-grid flexibility. Instead of eliminating codes entirely, the town and surrounding county have set their minimum square footage requirement at 320 square feet for residential structures in unincorporated areas. That's the lowest threshold among major Texas counties that still maintain some level of building enforcement. It's also the magic number for people who want to live in a tiny home without fighting City Hall. The distinction between Waxahachie and the Trans-Pecos towns is significant. Here you're building under a code framework. That means inspections, permits, and compliance with electrical and plumbing standards. But the code framework is flexible enough to accommodate micro-living in a way that most suburban jurisdictions prohibit. A 320 square foot home on a permanent foundation will pay property taxes based on the combined value of the land and structure. But it's legal. You're not operating in a gray zone. This matters for people who want the benefits of off-grid living, low overhead, minimal resource consumption, energy independence, without completely disconnecting from municipal infrastructure. You can still hook up to county water if it's available. You can still access emergency services without wondering if your home is technically illegal. The trade is that you're paying for permits and inspections, but you're also gaining legal clarity and property insurance options that may not be available for unpermitted structures. The zoning in rural unincorporated areas around Waxahachie is minimal, which means you're not fighting restrictions on solar arrays, rainwater collection tanks, or livestock, but you are subject to setback requirements, septic permitting, and basic structural safety standards. For someone who wants a tiny home but doesn't want to build entirely outside the system, Ellis County offers a middle path that balances autonomy with legal compliance. One additional consideration: tiny homes on wheels, often called THOWS, are classified as recreational vehicles under Texas law, not as real property. That means different tax treatment and different occupancy rules. If you park a THOW on your Ellis County land, you're technically camping, not residing. Some counties enforce this distinction aggressively, others ignore it. Ellis County tends to take a hands-off approach in unincorporated areas, but the legal ambiguity remains. If you want permanent legal residency, residency, build on a foundation and go through the permitting process. The proximity to the Dallas-Fort Worth metro also matters. You're close enough to access major medical centers, big box stores, and employment opportunities if needed. Baylor Scott and White Medical Center in Waxahachie provide solid emergency care, and you're within an hour's drive of multiple level 1 trauma centers in Dallas. But land prices reflect that access. You're not buying 20 acres for $5,000 like you would in Hudspeth County. Expect to pay significantly more for the combination of tiny home legality and metro proximity. The town of Waxahachie itself has charm. It's a historic downtown with preserved architecture, a growing food scene, and an active community life. If you're planning to live in a tiny home on rural property but still want access to coffee shops, farmers markets, and cultural events, this area delivers that balance. You're not choosing between total isolation and suburban sprawl. You're finding a middle ground where you can live small but still participate in a functional town. The practical considerations for building a tiny home in Ellis County are straightforward. You'll need to hire a licensed contractor or get owner-builder permits if you're doing the work yourself. The electrical and plumbing systems must pass inspection, which means you can't cut corners on safety even if you're building a tiny structure. But once you're permitted and inspected, you have a legal dwelling that can be insured, financed, and sold without the legal complications that come with unpermitted alternative structures. For people planning long-term homesteading rather than temporary experimentation, that legal certainty is worth the extra cost and bureaucracy. The water situation in Ellis County is also better than in the desert towns. Average annual rainfall is around 35 inches, which makes rainwater harvesting a viable primary water source if you design your catchment system properly. You're not hauling water or drilling 800 feet for a marginal well. The climate is more humid, which presents its own challenges: mold, insects, storm management, but it eliminates the existential water scarcity that defines life in the Trans-Pecos. Marquez. Marquez, a small town in Llano County about halfway between Dallas and Houston, has taken a different approach to attracting off-grid residents. Under Texas Local Government Code, Chapters 380 and 381, cities and counties can provide grants or loans of public funds to promote economic development. Marquez has historically used these tools to attract new residents who will contribute to the local economy, tailoring agreements to provide property tax rebates or infrastructure grants for people planning to run small home-based businesses. The mechanics of these chapters matter because they define what's actually negotiable. Chapter 380 allows cities to offer cash grants, loans, or property tax rebates for projects that promote economic development. Chapter 381 gives counties the same authority. The application process typically requires submitting a business plan, demonstrating financial capacity, and showing how your project creates jobs or increases the tax base. In Marquez, that might mean proposing a small agricultural operation, a tourism-related business like cabin rentals, or a workshop producing goods for regional markets. Remote work alone won't qualify. You need to show tangible economic activity that benefits the local community. A typical agreement might waive 50% of property taxes for the first 5 years, then phase back to full assessment. Some deals include infrastructure cost sharing, where the town pays for road improvements or utility extensions. The key difference from La Villa's program is flexibility. La Villa has fixed requirements: 900 square feet, 5-year vesting, immediate construction. Marquez can structure deals based on what you bring to the table. If you're a skilled tradesperson willing to take local jobs, that's leverage. If you're establishing an organic farm that will sell at regional markets, that's leverage. The town sits in an area that qualifies for USDA Rural Economic Development programs, which provide zero-interest loans and grants to rural utilities that can then be passed through to local projects. For off-grid residents planning community-scale projects, shared well systems, microgrids, or collaborative homesteading arrangements, these funds can provide critical startup capital. The maximum grant amount for revolving loan funds is $300,000, and loans can reach up to $1 million at 0% interest for 10 years. Land costs in the Marquez area are moderate compared to the desert regions. You're looking at roughly $2,000 to $5,000 per acre depending on terrain and road access. That's 5 to 10 times what you'd pay in Presidio County, but you're buying into a region with 40 inches of annual rainfall and established road networks. The town requires standard building permits for residential construction. Permit fees run a few $100s for a basic residential structure, plus inspection costs. But the economic development incentives can offset those compliance costs through tax abatements or direct grants if you're establishing a business alongside inside your homestead. The climate in Llano County is considerably more humid than West Texas, with average annual rainfall around 40 inches. That makes rainwater harvesting a reliable primary water source and eliminates the water hauling logistics that define life in the Trans-Pecos. A standard residential roof with proper guttering and storage tanks can supply a household's water needs year-round, but the humidity also brings challenges: mold management, insect pressure, and the need for proper ventilation. Building materials that work fine in the desert become maintenance nightmares in humid East Texas. Healthcare access sits in the middle range. You're approximately 100 miles from Level 1 or Level 2 trauma centers in either Tyler or College Station. That's manageable for routine care, but requires serious consideration for anyone with chronic medical conditions requiring specialist access. The town itself has basic medical services, a small clinic with nurse practitioners who can handle common illnesses and minor injuries, but complex procedures mean a drive. Emergency response times are reasonable for the immediate Marquez area. Volunteer fire department and EMS can typically reach you within 15 to 20 minutes if you're on maintained roads. The practical reality of economic development incentives in a town like Marquez is that they're negotiable. Unlike the free land program in La Villa with its fixed requirements, chapters 380 and 381 give local governments discretion in structuring deals. That means if you're bringing skills, capital, or a business plan that the town values, you can potentially negotiate property tax abatements, infrastructure cost sharing, or other incentives that lower your overall cost of establishing an off-grid homestead. But it requires active engagement with local government and a willingness to demonstrate how your presence benefits the community economically. The negotiation process isn't formalized. You're meeting with the city council or county commissioners, presenting your case, and seeing what they're willing to offer. That means the outcome depends heavily on your proposal, your presentation, and the current priorities of local leadership. The smaller the town, the more personal these negotiations become. In Marquez, you're dealing with a tight-knit community where reputation matters and follow-through is remembered. These economic development agreements often include clawback provisions. If you accept a 5-year property tax abatement but then sell the property in year 3, you might owe back taxes. If you promise to create jobs but don't, the incentives can be revoked. Llano. Llano, a hill country town northwest of Austin, represents the intersection of tiny home flexibility and renewable energy adoption at the local level. The county has no minimum square footage requirement in unincorporated areas, making it one of the most permissive jurisdictions for micro-living in Central Texas. But what sets Llano apart is the combination of building flexibility with superior water access and a local culture that has embraced alternative energy. The town receives 26 to 28 inches of annual rainfall, making rainwater harvesting significantly more viable than in the Trans-Pecos desert towns. The solar potential is strong despite more cloud cover. Cloudiest month is February at 44%, and the town has seen steady adoption of residential solar systems over the past decade. The local building department is familiar with off-grid applications and generally supportive of alternative energy installations as long as they meet basic safety standards. Property costs in Llano County are higher than in the remote desert regions, but considerably lower than in the Austin metro. Expect to pay $5,000 to $10,000 per acre for rural land with decent road access. The trade is that you're buying into a region with established infrastructure, better water resources, and proximity to a major city without actually living in suburban sprawl. That land cost buys you maintained county roads, emergency service coverage, established well drilling infrastructure, and proximity to building suppliers. When you're hauling lumber and materials, being an hour from a real hardware store instead of 4 hours makes a significant difference. Property taxes in Llano County run approximately 1.7 to 2% of assessed value, which is higher than some rural counties but includes actual services, maintained roads, functional emergency response, and viable school districts. Homestead exemptions can lower that burden significantly, especially for retirees. If you're over 65, additional exemptions kick in that can cut your tax bill substantially. The distance to Austin is roughly 90 minutes, which puts you within reasonable range of multiple level 1 trauma centers, specialized medical care, and every type of supply or service you might need. Llano Memorial Hospital provides basic emergency care locally. They can stabilize you and handle routine emergencies, but complex medical needs are handled in Austin. For retirees or families with medical medical considerations, this proximity matters significantly compared to the 200-mile isolation of the Trans-Pecos towns. If you need regular specialist visits for chronic conditions, the difference between a 90-minute drive and a 4-hour drive is the difference between manageable and unsustainable. The local building permit process in Llano County requires electrical and plumbing inspections, which means you can't cut corners on safety even if you're building a tiny structure. Permit fees typically run $200 to $400, depending on the scope of work, plus inspection fees. You'll need licensed contractors for certain work. Electrical and plumbing typically require licensed tradespeople. But once you're permitted and inspected, you have a legal dwelling that can be insured, financed, and sold without the legal complications that come with unpermitted alternative structures. Homeowners insurance companies will actually write policies for permitted tiny homes on foundations in Llano County. The County Appraisal District is familiar with solar exemption applications under Texas Property Tax Code Section 11.27, and processing is typically straightforward. You file the exemption form during the standard protest period, usually May through July, and the district reviews your documentation. You'll need receipts showing the solar system cost, proof of installation, and verification that the system is operational. Llano County also recognizes rainwater harvesting exemptions. The county encourages rainwater harvesting because it reduces demand on groundwater resources. Septic requirements in Llano County follow state standards, which means you need a soil test, a permit from the county, and an engineered system appropriate for your soil type. Costs typically run $3,000 to $6,000 for a conventional septic system, while drilling in Llano County is more predictable than in the Trans-Pecos. Average well depths run 150 to 300 feet, with drilling costs around $25 to $40 per foot. That puts a typical well installation in the $8,000 to $15,000 range. Success rates are high because the area sits on fractured limestone aquifers. Internet access in rural Llano County has improved significantly with Starlink availability. Traditional options are spotty and slow in many areas. Starlink provides reliable high-speed internet almost anywhere in the county, which matters if you're working remotely. The service runs around $120 per month. The hill country landscape brings considerations that don't exist in flat desert regions. Flash flooding is a real risk, especially in low-lying areas near creeks. Site selection matters enormously. You need to understand drainage patterns and avoid building in areas that become water channels during heavy rain. The soil is often rocky, which complicates foundation work and gardening, but provides excellent drainage. The local culture in Llano leans libertarian, but not isolationist. People value independence and self-sufficiency, but there's also active community life. Newcomers who engage respectfully and contribute to the community are generally welcomed. This matters more than you might think. In a rural area, your neighbors are your emergency backup, your source of local knowledge, and potentially your trading partners for goods and services. The practical considerations for off-grid living in Llano Center on balancing autonomy with access. You're not achieving the total regulatory freedom of Hudspeth County or the dirt-cheap land prices of Presidio, but you're gaining legal clarity, better resource availability, and proximity to services that make long-term homesteading more sustainable for people who can't or don't want to manage extreme isolation. The pattern across all 7 towns is consistent. Texas incentivizes off-grid living because rural depopulation threatens local governments. When towns lose residents, they lose tax revenue for roads, schools, and emergency services. The response has been to recruit self-sufficient residents through land giveaways, regulatory exemptions, and economic incentives. La Villa gives you land if you promise to build. Alpine, Terlingua, Presidio, Fort Hancock, and Sierra Blanca give you freedom if you can handle your own infrastructure. Marquez offers negotiable development deals. Llano provides tiny home flexibility with better resource access. The trade-offs are real. Free land in La Villa means moving to a high-poverty region with limited local amenities but solid healthcare access. Regulatory freedom in Alpine and Terlingua means medical care is hours away, and water is something you haul, but you get to build structures that would be illegal anywhere else. Tiny home legality in Waxahachie means paying for permits and working within code frameworks. Development incentives in Marquez require active negotiation with local government and demonstrating economic contribution. Llano's balanced approach costs more in land prices but delivers legal clarity and resource access. The question of which model works best depends entirely on your situation, skills, and tolerance for isolation. Retirees with medical considerations should prioritize healthcare access, which points toward La Villa, Waxahachie, or Llano. Young Young families might prioritize educational options and community resources, again favoring towns closer to metro areas. Experienced owner-builders with strong DIY skills and minimal medical needs can thrive in the regulatory-free zones of the Trans-Pecos, where cheap land and structural freedom create opportunities that don't exist elsewhere. People planning business operations alongside homesteading should look at Marquez and the economic development incentive structure. But right now, in this moment, the opportunities are real and accessible. The state of Texas has created a framework where off-grid living isn't just tolerated, but actively encouraged through multiple mechanisms. That framework exists because of genuine economic need in rural areas, which means the incentives are substantial enough to matter. You can get free land, cheap land with no oversight, negotiable tax abatements, legal tiny home pathways, and statewide exemptions that make energy independence financially viable. The practical advice for anyone seriously considering these opportunities: visit first. Don't buy land sight unseen based on a listing. Drive to these towns, walk the properties, talk to locals, understand the water situation, check the cell coverage, and gauge whether you can actually live there long term. Make sure your vision of off-grid homesteading matches the reality of the specific location you're considering. Being ready for off-grid living means more than having the capital to buy land and build a structure. It means having the skills to maintain systems, troubleshoot problems, and handle emergencies without calling a contractor every time something breaks. It means having the temperament to handle isolation, whether that's physical isolation in the Trans-Pecos or social isolation as an outsider in a tight-knit small town. It means having realistic expectations about what your daily life will actually look like. If you have those skills, that temperament, and those realistic expectations, Texas has built a system where you can make it work. If you don't, no amount of free land or tax incentives will make off-grid living sustainable.